Good afternoon and welcome you all. Ramesh Jude Thomas, welcome you on board for this CEO Word series. Interestingly, in this program, we also have our common friend, Mr. Alvin Saldana, who has joined us.
How do you
I think
do?
the house is full. The house is full.
Okay. Actually, the reality is yes and no. You know. So over the next half an hour, I'd like to examine three broad areas under the yes and the no. Um, I don't have any specific business gyan, as I said, but I think it's good to think about it more broadly in the context of society, the politics that we are all subject to over the last 3 or 4 days. And I think it's great entertainment also, in the context of economy and the context of societal fabric as a whole. So let's see what those three sections are. I first want to examine what this crisis is not in the first part, right? In the second part, I want to examine something important. Was it essential for us to have this crisis upon us? No crisis is something we like, but sometimes you have to ask ourselves, was it needed? And some people will say yes, actually. Most people will say no. And the third is that what does it mean for us? Am I still there?
Yeah, you're there. You're there.
Okay. What does it mean for us? And are there significant gains of any kind that we can see on the other side of this crisis? So the first is the double-edged sword. Has the world come to an end? Yes and no. The reality is that the world as we know it has definitely come to an end. What I mean is that many of the things that we did and many of the ways in which we did those things are no longer going to be relevant. And I think that all of you, even if you're not running businesses or running countries, would have realized that by now, that even in your role as a student, so much has changed that what we took for granted is not necessarily going to last. It's history now, right? And we have seen this in the past in many breaks with the past that history itself has had. And there are any number of instances we can take. What it is definitely a crisis of unprecedented proportions. Okay, so in my lifetime, I have not seen anything like this, which has globally affected us, which has put upon us a level of unpredictability on most things that we can't even perceive, unpredictability, right? And has also spread fear in the order of magnitude that we've not seen before. Okay. Now, these are not new things that you're hearing. There are commentators of all hues in every geography, from every political and ideological point of view, that have passed a view on this one way or the other. So this is not new. But I think what we need to examine is what this crisis is not. So let's go back to the theme. Is the world going to end? It's easy to say no, but at the same time, as I said, it's never going to be the same. But have we weathered such storms? That's important to reflect on for a while. Right? When I was a kid, there were two things that I personally experienced, which is of a different order of magnitude, disrupted my life entirely and the life of society as I knew around me. Okay, when I was really tiny, there was the war with Pakistan, right? And it wasn't a very long one. It lasted for 3 weeks. But I remember that all the things that we knew, that we took for granted as doing normally, we couldn't. We couldn't have windows which were open. We had to blacken out our windows. When air raid warnings comes, we were not allowed to go outside. We couldn't go and buy stuff. But it lasted for 3 weeks. It wasn't a big deal, but it just changed everything about us and the way we went around sort of living our normal lives. Okay. The other, another 4 or 5 years later, was the emergency. None of you here would be old enough to remember it. Most of your parents would. Again, everything came to a dead stop because we were not allowed to do things that we normally did, right? It was a political crisis, but it was a crisis, no doubt. And all that we knew as normal went out of the window. And yet, Both of those, where everything came to a standstill, we overcame. Okay, but the biggest story from the two big stories, I would say, from the last century that were global and which destroyed normalcy of all kinds. One, as you may have read several times during this last 6 or 8 months, was the Spanish flu. It killed just under 41 million people across the world and afflicted something like 900 million, right? And it brought life to a grinding halt as we know it. The one that I think most of us would remember in reading, being exposed to in films, stories, articles, archives, etc., is the Second World War. That killed 75 million people in the space of 6 short years and brought the world to its knees, the world as we know it. Like the pandemic, it affected most countries across the world, even the ones that were neutral, that so-called neutral, were not completely free of its clutches. It affected them in some way or the other. And I would remind you that it wiped out 2/3 of an entire community in Europe, that is the Jewish community. And it's something that I'm sure you would know, but you may not have known the extent of it. Yeah, but we survived that. We not only survived it, but flourished post that with strength, with courage, with compassion, and with creativity. I don't use these words irresponsibly, and therefore I will repeat them, right? Post that disaster, where the entire world came to its knees, it's not as though the victors were spared. The victors were as badly scarred in their societies and their economies as were the people who lost. But it doesn't matter which side of, let's say, the conquest you were, but you came out of it with strength, with courage, with compassion, and with creativity. Let's see if those 4 words actually can reflect in some of the things that we see already happening in the 9th or 8th month of this crisis in India. Okay, let's put this in perspective also in India, right? Think about tuberculosis. We have 2 million cases a year and 134 deaths, 34,000 deaths, okay? We have 4.54 million cases, right? AIDS is still killing people since I first came to know about it in 1980, and we've had 32 million deaths so far. We have found treatment for it. People are better off both physically and mentally as a consequence of it. But if you got that, death was almost a certainty. And the world has survived that as well. We lose 800,000 kids, almost 1 million kids, to just malnutrition before the age of 5. We're dealing with it, right? Tuberculosis, as I just mentioned to you, is much bigger, okay? So the size of these crises, whether global or whether in India, right, is not new to us. Are we dealing with it? Yes, we are. Are we dealing with it very well? Sometimes very well, sometimes not. Have you overcome some of these? Almost always, right? So is the world going to end as we know? I mean, in a physical sense, no. But we certainly are not going to be left with what we know to be normal, right? This is what I wanted to first put before you in terms of the reality and the perspective of this crisis. Okay. Now, the other question I want to examine is that, you know, in the middle of something like this, the question to be asked is, was this necessary? That's an interesting question. Did we deserve this? You know, we keep asking ourselves sometimes when bad things happen, why did it happen to me? Why did it happen to us? So the question, if you ask the whole world, asks itself, did we deserve this? There are some interesting things to reflect upon. So, you know, I'm sure each of you must have come across this in some form or the other. It's sometimes Mother Nature's way of reminding us that she is the landlord. We are only the tenants, and we are very short-term tenants at that. Okay, very, very short-term tenants, in fact. Now, if you're not a conspiracy theorist who believes that, some evil power or deep state has done this to us for some, economic or political leverage, you will realize that it is a natural convergence of the many things that we have or have not done. I'm not denying it could be a conspiracy, but it doesn't matter. Either way, I think it's good to be reminded of who is the boss, and we are not. So we get really aggravated when something like this happens. So the question to ask ourselves is, did we deserve it? I mean, was it required? I wouldn't say we deserve it. That's a wrong phrase. Okay. 3 quotations from different people whom I look up to, right? One is actually my sister the other day. We were chatting. I was chatting with her. She lives in Toronto. And she says, isn't it strange that the world economy is collapsing just because people are only buying what is essential? Right? Think about it. Okay. Which means that we have actually stopped excesses. We are still living quite well. We are eating decently, many of us, right? We are exercising a lot, but we're not using non-essentials. And that's why the world is collapsing. Strange, Okay. Now, the other quote is from a gentleman called George Packer, who writes for something called The Atlantic, an online US magazine that I like very much. It's very old. It's more than 70 years old, the magazine. He says the coronavirus didn't break America. It just revealed what was broken. Right? And this, I think you must agree with me, because there are so many holes in that piece of cheese that it's just come to the fore through something like coronavirus brought to the front. And the last is from Warren Buffett. I'm sure all of you must have heard of him and why he's so famous. His big thing is that I don't like to invest for the short term. I don't like to invest to bet. If I invest, I take a long-term bet. And therefore, when I invest, I must put money in something which has a solid foundation. Okay? And this quote comes from him when he talks very often to people who are really interested in speculative betting. And they all want to know what's the magic of his making money. Okay, there's no connection between the two. So he says, it is only when the tide goes out that you know who is swimming naked. Shall I repeat that? He says, it's only when the tide goes out that you really know who's swimming naked. So the virus has actually pulled out the tide. And many of the things that we took for granted, that was an easy life, and that what I like to call built on tailwinds, has gone. The headwinds are upon us. But we'll come to that in a bit. Okay. The second idea I'd like to explore with you is, if it's a punishment, is it good or bad? So all of us, when we are young, and even younger than you guys, when we are punished at home, what would our parents do? They would say, go to the room and sit down till I call you out. Lock yourself in the room. Don't come out till I tell you. And you would get really angry because you couldn't do everything that you were supposed to do, that you want to do. You couldn't go to play, you couldn't talk to your friends, but you were told when you were small, just go into the room and sit there till I tell you, you can't come out. It was like imprisonment for us. And today, physically, many of us are in imprisonment. Right? But what it has led to, think about it. It has led to us reflecting very deeply about many things that in normal course of exciting life and in the tailwind, we don't think about. What don't we think about? We don't think about the way we look after our health. We don't think about our relationships. We don't think about compassion. Right? And those are the things that you actually reflect upon when you're punished. What did I do wrong? Why did mama punish me? Why did daddy send me to the room? And then you ask yourself, and some interesting answers do come, no? You're seething inside, but when you reflect that 1 hour which you are spending inside the room and you're punished, you do think. And all of us today have been forced into reflection mode. That is a reality. Don't deny it. Right? The third idea is efficiency. We are all learning to work and to make do with less of much, less of freedom, less of capital. And we are realizing, maybe we didn't need it. Can we do sales only on the internet? Ours, for example, we always believed was a very heavy lifting business, which required us face-to-face time with clients, deep analysis, lots of group dynamics to deliver the transformation around brands that we promised. We have a tool, for example, called the Pygmalion, which is a 2-day strategic workshop, which is highly intense. We have forever believed in the last 19 years that we existed before the virus, that it's just impossible to do it, to conduct it successfully without all those 18, 20 people in the room, the leadership of the firm or the institution or sometimes even the country that we work with. We have to do a lot of heavy lifting in terms of reflection, talking, debate, the group dynamics, etc. And it could never be done without it. You know, in the last 6 months, we have delivered 5 of these, all digitally, okay? 1 for an education institution and 2 in a foreign country using digital tools, right? So we have now realized that all that we took for granted can be made more efficient in many ways. And I'm sure you can find many other examples like this, which you are going through and you have delivered successfully in your own lives. Look at education, okay? Lots and lots of real estate that is sitting in the hands of many people, okay? And they always believe that the value is in the real estate. Today, look at it. Do you think in the next 3 to 4 years, real estate on those buildings are really going to be of any consequence? Do you think that you can digitize education completely? There is not a single institute that I know, and I talk to many, who is not thinking of a complete flip, which is going to be digital-led. And Dr. KKR and I have had one small conversation on this, not more, and I think he thinks the same way, right? So what was this whole real estate about in the first place? Don't tell me that, you know, you were forced to think about it. No, I am saying you did not think about it before. You could have. Right? And that is why it's very important for us as we go along in normal course of life to simulate a crisis. I always tell people, do not waste a good crisis, because it is the best thing that makes you think sharply. If you don't have one, create one, simulate one. The 4th idea I want to explore in this section is the idea of abundance. At the human level, it's been a long while since I saw such a generous outbreak of empathy and compassion for other people. I am seeing on the streets, young people, your age, maybe even younger, going from house, building to building, checking out on which houses have old people living by themselves, bringing them food and helping them out to live their lives because they're locked in and their children may not be available. I have seen 18 and 19-year-old MBBS students going to villages and doing large-scale sessions on how women should take care of themselves in the crisis, all voluntarily. I am sure you have heard myriad stories about people using their own money and savings to feed laborers on the street. I'm sure all of you have heard the story of this Hindi movie guy called Sonu Sood, right? Who has been using his money and his connections and his brand to be able to help large numbers of disenfranchised laborers, migrant laborers. Okay, there has been an outbreak of compassion and empathy, the likes of which we have never seen. The question I have is, why is it that this doesn't happen in the normal course? That's the big question we should keep asking ourselves, right? Why is it doesn't happen in the normal course? But it's happening, and therefore it means that we're capable of it. But in special circumstances, I think we shouldn't be looking for special circumstances. The last idea I want to explore is innovation, okay? And I'm sure you can find many examples, but here is one which I think will make the point. Check this guy out. His name is Aditya Panch Pandey. He is an entrepreneur and the CEO of a company called NextGenov 8 Foundation. His invention is something called a Suraksha box. It's a UV sanitizer box that, what do you call it, disinfects items of daily use without any chemicals and stuff. He has a global patent. He has been invited to the Seattle Innovation Summit of Amazon. He has spoken at the Maharashtra Innovation Summit and at the India Technical Summit in the presence of the Prime Minister. Okay. Now, you heard what he did, right? The Suraksha box. None of this may be strange, but you know what the stuff that I want to leave at the end for you? This gentleman, this character called Aditya Panchpande is 14 years old. He's a class 9 student in Pune. Now check it out. Okay, his ideas were born in the middle of the crisis, at the beginning of the crisis. He's a 14-year-old CEO of his own company. He holds a global patent. He has been invited by Amazon. Just all the stuff that I told you, just take it back in the context of his age. Then you'll know why it's special. Okay. Now, this is one story. It's an extreme story. I can tell you 14. I'm sure you can tell me 5 at least each. Right? That is the reason I'm saying that these special circumstances bring out special qualities in us. The point is, it was always there. Why does it take a crisis to bring it out? Think about that. The last question that I want to examine with you comes from two simple quotes from JFK. One says, he said at a university once, do not pray for easy lives. Pray to be stronger men. Do not pray for easy lives. Pray to be stronger men. The second quote, at some other time when he spoke, he said that wisdom needs the long view. And why are these both important? Because in trouble, we're always praying to get out of trouble, right? Not to look for the deep strength that can deal with it. Save me from this. That's what we keep saying. Ye mujhe nahi chahiye. Secondly, why is wisdom lacking? Because as a nation, as a society, we tend to be highly transactional. Aaj ka bhav, right? Whether we're looking for a graduation certificate or whether we are looking for a private equity investment, whether we are looking for a job, whatever it is, it's always short term. The deal, it's about the deal, correct? Wisdom cannot be about the deal. It's about the long view. Okay. So in this section, I want to ask you a question. When you sail and return from a bad storm, what is your first instinct? When you go out sailing and come back, bad storm, what do you think? Your first thought is my boat strong enough? If there is no storm, I doubt if you're going to even think about the strength of the boat. You'll think about your girlfriend who's traveling with you. That's all. Okay, how nice the day is and what all dialogue you can give her. ठीक है? अगर थोड़ा ज़्यादा हवा होता है ना, हिल जाता है. That's the time when you think, oh my God, is my boat strong enough? So in fair weather, tailwinds will always carry you through. It is only in a crisis that you have to ask yourself, am I strong enough? What am I truly made up of? What is my metal? It doesn't matter whether you're an individual or an individual crisis or a global crisis. You will perforce ask yourself, what am I truly made up of? And some of the strongest, biggest turnarounds and most dramatic turnarounds in history were pivoted on this same logic. Think about IBM under Louis Gerstner. It was going to die. Think about post-war Germany or Japan, right? And I can tell you a myriad stories from the work that we've done because it has all been built on simulating a crisis. Companies that were doing reasonably well, they were not going anywhere, they were not dying or anything. Most of them, some of them, yes, they came to us in a crisis. But most of them were chugging along nicely. And one time CEO says, boss, maja nahi aa raha hai. Matlab, nahi, isme maja nahi hai. Now to take the maja, he has to grow. And you cannot do that unless you simulate a crisis, which is why I repeat, do not waste a good crisis. Think of post-war Germany. It would not only lost the war, it lost its mojo as an economy, and it lost its mojo as a people. There was no self-worth left in that country. Okay, Japan is another example, but it's a parallel. But what Germany did was to ask themselves, in this destruction, is there something worthwhile about us? And can we create a new Germany around that which is still worthwhile in all the destruction, in all the debris that is our nation, both societally, physically, and economically, right? And they built on something called the Mittelstand logic. I won't dwell on it, but the entire thing was based on the fact that there are small firms with global standards and scale, and that is where they found the reflection of the true Germany, and built an entire economic policy, capital policy on capital, and an economic structure that reflected the true Germany. So today we say a German company, a German guy, German logic, and there is something respectful about that. Today they are the third largest, but of all, the most solid economy in the world. You can say the same of Japan as well. Right? So it is in a crisis that you look deep within yourself and figure out that whether you can build something much bigger of yourself around what you discovered past the crisis, or even to help the crisis. Right? So I just want to bring back something small that I missed. I think it's worth it. In April, when we looked at our numbers, we found that 80% of our clients had canceled their contracts, and 100% of our sales funnel had canceled the discussions with us. And we were staring down what we call proverbially the barrel of the gun. The question that we had to ask ourselves at that point of time was, do we close? Right? What's truly been a magnificent idea and a magnificent journey because of this, or is there a way to survive it? So we did two things. We took a small cut. We also decided that whatever has to be done, we will do from the balance sheet, but we cannot lose what we have built. We cannot lose the responsibility to the people that they put their trust in us as a society and as an economy. And we cannot let go a bunch of people whose spirit is what drove what we have been able to achieve so far. So we did a couple of things. We said, can we go back to our clients? They can't afford to pay us, but they didn't sack us. They just said that they're embarrassed we can't pay you anymore. And we can't think about the future. There's no future to think about. And we can't pay you because there's no cash. So we said, what is it that you are going through? And can we support you in what you're going through? The problem always is when you think of client is a big guy. When you think of yourself as a boutique consultant, you're a small guy. Hum log kya bolega usko? Aukad nahi hai. What shall we go and tell a big guy? Right? So that's not the way to look at it. They put trust in you. So for them, in the context of what you do for them, you are bigger than them. Go back and talk to them. We did. Then we found other people who were like that, but were not talking to us. And today, we are so busy validating new business models, which we are testing for the other side of the crisis. We are busier than ever before. So one, in a crisis, is there abundance? Two, in a crisis, do you know who you are, really who you are? And, two thoughts in closing. It was Charles Darwin who said that it's not the strongest of the species or the most intelligent of the species that will survive, but the most adaptive. Is it not something that resonates in this time? And so the question that I want to leave you all with at this point of time, as the next gen of India, right, will be this: will we buckle under the fragility of our social and economic structure that we have? 23.9% collapse in economy. Or will we use this opportunity to build a benign superpower, truly reflective of our pluralistic heritage that we have been so proud of for the last 5,000 years? Thanks a lot.